Hello there folks, Mr. K here, the mediocre painter, and I've been painting miniatures for some 30 odd years, and I am doing YouTube videos to get you into the wargaming hobby because I've made the mistakes so you don't have to. Now, if you have given me the courtesy of watching my videos of late, you'll know that the last video I did was around flesh tones on miniatures, particularly focusing on human miniatures, of course. Now, if you are concerned about doing flesh tones and such, then you can watch my video here and it might give you some tips to get something pretty decent without significant effort. You'll also be worried about, at some point no doubt, is doing the eyes. Now, as human beings, we are naturally drawn to the face on all miniatures, all models, and we are particularly critical whenever we do human beings, because we are human beings ourselves, and therefore we know what things should look like. So we know what skin and flesh tones should look like, we know what eyes should look like, and these are really important features to us. It's kind of ingrained in us when we're just very, very young and we're small children, really, to be able to recognise faces, unless you have, of course, face blindness, which some people unfortunately do. So, doing eyes is an important part of the miniature because you are naturally drawn to those eyes, and doing them is a fairly scary proposition because it's small. It's not so bad on hero model scales, but on other scales, true scales, it's even more difficult. And unless you've got the brush control, it is a scary prospect. And really, my recommendation would be, as a beginner, is get confident in painting the rest of the miniature before you get into the devil details, because the devil is really in the details, and the eyes are really important to get done quite well. So, tips for when you're doing eyes when you're a beginner. Now, the top guys in the miniatures painting arena are going to use a big brush with a very fine point, and they like to do that because the brush holds a lot of paint. They can get it the consistency they like, they can paint for a while without having to go back and pick up more paint onto the brush, and they've got a lot of skill and a lot of brush control, and they find that that gives them exactly what they need. As a beginner, you're not going to be doing that. You're going to be using the smaller brushes because you don't yet have the brush control to use the bigger ones and things like that. So when you're doing eyes, I recommend go for a smaller brush, like a 10 or a 20-0. It will really help you do those fine details like eyes. Also, when you paint the eyes, it's really important that the paint is nice and smooth and goes on well. And a good way to check that it is nice and smooth is obviously to use a wet palette, as we should all be using, but run the paint along your thumbnail and just check, yeah, that's consistently going on, because that is going to be really important for you. The last thing you want is, when you're dotting the pupil of an eye, is to go onto the miniature and successfully manage to do it bang in the middle where you need it to be, and realise that the paint won't come off the brush because it's not of the right consistency. So, as a beginner, there's kind of three techniques, I would say, to doing eyes. There's kind of the dot technique, where you'll dot the pupil in the middle of the eye socket. There's the T technique, where you sort of draw the top part of the eye and then do like a T for the pupil. And then there's the either side technique, where you basically you paint the entire eye black and then do like a white dot either side of the pupil, and that's basically gives you the result you're looking for. So I'm going to describe those with a bit of paper and a pen, because it's easier to describe it that way than actually show you in how you actually do it, because I don't have the camera sophistication to be able to get really detailed in there to really show you what the differences are between them, and it's better I actually describe it by drawing. I do have a few models to sort of show you where those different techniques were used, and that might give you an idea of why you might use those different techniques, because at the end of the day, different models behave differently from the way the eye socket is carved, and in terms of how easily it is for you to get your brush where you really want it. So these three different techniques, you know, sometimes apply differently to different models, and you may find that one particular type of technique works better on some models than others. So over to the drawing demo. Okay, so I'm going to start with what I think is probably the technique that you're going to use the most when you actually come to doing eyes with your miniatures. And what you're most likely to do is to basically, here's our eye, like so. What you're most likely to do is to paint that eye a solid black. And then, important, let the sucker dry. Very important that. Let it dry, and then what you're going to do is you're going to paint white in the middle of it, leaving a black outline. Now I usually find that going white on black like that is easier than starting with white and trying to do a black outline. That's the reason why I recommend you do it that way. You may find that you've got a little bit more control than me, and that doing a black outline on a white background is a better way to do it. And then finally, you're going to let that dry, of course. That's important. Sorry for my appalling sketching. You're going to dot the pupil right in the middle. Now, I use, for majority of my eyes, I use black for the background, and then a white, and then a black again. The reason for that is really one of contrast. If you use, you know, the black on white, then the eyes really pop out, and you know they look cool. You may want to do a brown outline, perhaps. Maybe a brown, a dark brown with a white and a black. But I find if you do like coloured pupils, like a blue or a brown and things, they don't often look right. And so I find that I end up doing them black anyway. So on miniatures, recently I painted a Luke Skywalker miniature from Imperial Assault, and he's really a blonde-haired, blue-eyed kind of guy. It just didn't look right when I did blue for the eyes, because it just didn't seem to stand out. So that's basically technique number one, and this is probably the one that you're going to use the most, and I call this one the dot method. That's the dot method, because basically, you know, you're doing a dot for the pupil. The next one is the T method. So on the T method, you basically do your eye white first, okay? And then you paint the top black, going along like that, and then come down either side like this, in like a T, to give you the eye. And on a small miniature like that, you won't really notice that it's kind of, you know, like a sort of, you won't really notice that it's kind of like, I'm not really sure, a funnel, you know, when you paint it. And strong emphasis here though is that the black at the top, but no real black line at the bottom. So sort of in the way that ladies do eye makeup, you know, you do eyeliner at the top of the eye, but not necessarily so much at the bottom. The advantages of this technique really are, it's actually probably a little bit easier to do than the dot technique. You don't need quite so steady a hand, because you're using the miniature to support your brush as you do the painting on either side. However, you can't always use this technique because you can't get your brush in on either side in order to be able to really do it quite right. So that's one of the reasons why you can't always use it, and you'll probably find you'll use the dot technique more often than this one. The last technique is the either side technique. So here it's quite similar to the dot technique in that you do your eye as a black, or I don't know, dark brown maybe, or whatever, and then what you're going to do is you're going to bring in your white paint, or it doesn't always have to be white, by the way. You know, you could use like a bone or something like that, you know, because people's pupils aren't exactly white. But the reason why I use white and black most of the time is simply because of that contrast. And miniature models really benefit from strong contrast because you can see them much more clearly. At the end of the day, these are only 28mm scale miniatures, or 30mm scale miniatures most of the time. So contrast is key in order to be able to do this, especially if you want half decent results as a beginner. So essentially here what you do is you bring your brush along and you paint like either side of your black white. So basically you do 2 dots of white either side of the pupil. I mean, that's a rather crude representation I have there of doing it, but that's what you do. So the disadvantage with this one is you actually have to do 2 dots either side of the pupil. So I find that really this one is one that you're probably more rarely likely to use. Still, it's a perfectly valid technique and it does produce pretty decent results. So now sort of going to give you some examples of when I use these 3 different techniques. So this one I call the either side. This one we call the dot, and this one's called the T. So this here is a chosen X, which I did recently, and this is using the dot method. So basically I did the eyeball as a brown first, and then a white, keeping the line of the brown around it, and I dotted with a black. And you can see that turned out not half bad. I'm not brilliant at doing eyes, but that's okay, and it's always a bit of a relief when I get the eyeballs more or less in the middle and he doesn't look too skew when he's staring at you. So this is an example of the T method. So this is a very stylized Katachan jungle fighter I did some months ago now, and this is using the T method. So you can see there's not really necessarily an outline at the bottom of the eye in a black, and you can see that there is at the top, and then I've basically just drawn it down to do the pupil. And you can see that that works, you know, quite well. And one of the nice things I find about the T method is it is easier to do on a more consistent basis, because you're not so reliant on your steady hand, because you can use the miniature to support the brush as you go along the top of the eye and come down. And this is an example of the either side method. So here basically painted the eyeball black and then basically did a dot of white either side to try and get the pupil done. And I did that in this particular case. I think I might have actually even done it by accident here. Simply that just ended up being the best way to do it because of that. But a lot of the time this is a good one when you can actually get to both sides of the eyeball and the eye is a little smaller. It's often a good technique because it might be difficult to actually get a nice pupil in there by just doing it using the dot method. Right then, so that's it for eyes. Hopefully those 3 techniques can help you out. As ever with these things, practice makes perfect, and eyes are really about brush control. And really, if you want to get better at doing them, best way to get better is to practice and go from one miniature to another, having a go. And don't try and get one eye absolutely perfect at a time. Try and do many in one go, and you'll find that you will gradually get better and better. And even over time you may find that you do them close to right each time. Hopefully that helps you. If you did like this video, then please like and subscribe. I will be doing more. I'll see you next time.